The silence that followed was suffocating, while my sister basked in the spotlight of her carefully curated world. Betrayed, belittled, erased, again. I had spent my life proving my worth, only to be treated like I was nothing. But they underestimated me. Their cruelty, their arrogance, it fueled me. They thought they won. The invitation arrived on thick ivory paper, embossed with gold lettering that screamed luxury and exclusivity, two things that had never been a part of my world. My sister, Vivian Evans, was getting married. Again, I traced the elegant calligraphy with my fingers, reading my name in scripted form. A stark contrast to the way she usually addressed me. Donna. Are you still doing that teaching thing? Of course. She had called to remind me. You must come. Donna. She'd insisted, her voice dripping with the kind of forced affection she only used when she needed something. It would be so strange if my only sister wasn't there. Then, just before hanging up, the part that lingered, and do try to look the part this time. I exhaled slowly, staring at the invitation in my small, cluttered apartment, the space that felt more like home than any of the mansions Vivian had ever lived in. She had built her life around power and status, while I had built mine around purpose. I worked with special needs children at Westbrook Elementary, a severely underfunded school where every dollar mattered. She flaunted wealth. I fought for resources. Two sisters, two completely different worlds. And this wedding? It was about to change everything. The message came just as I was finalizing lesson plans for my students. A simple text from Vivian, short, clipped, and laced with something she hadn't even bothered to disguise. Change of plans. You'll be seated at the reception with the event staff. Hope you understand. I blinked at the words, my stomach tightening with something sharp and cold. The event staff? I reread the message, hoping I had misunderstood. I had spent an entire month's salary on a dress that, while not designer, was elegant enough to avoid the scrutiny of my sister's high society circle. And now, she was pushing me to the sidelines, hiding me away like an embarrassment. My fingers trembled over the screen as I typed. You're seating me with the staff? I'm your sister. The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, before her response finally came. Donna. Please don't make a scene. You know how important appearances are. Lucas's business partners will be there. You understand, don't you? The anger inside me flared to life. Red hot and consuming. I understood perfectly. Vivian had spent her life curating perfection, discarding anything, or anyone, that didn't fit. And now, I was one of those things. My career, my choices, my existence outside of her polished, manicured world didn't align with the image she needed to maintain. I thought about all the years I had tried to support her. Through her failed ventures and broken engagements. Through the times she needed money, advice, or just someone to clean up her messes. And this, being shoved into the background of her most important day, was my repayment. I clenched my fist, willing myself not to respond in the heat of emotion. Instead, I stood, walked to the mirror, and stared at the reflection that she was so determined to erase. She had made her choice. Now, I was going to make mine. And for once, I wasn't going to stay in the shadows. I arrived at the wedding with my head held high. Despite the anger simmering beneath my skin, the sprawling estate was everything Vivian had always dreamed of, white rose arrangements dripping from gold arches, crystal chandeliers glistening through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and a valet line of luxury cars that made my aging sedan stick out like a sore thumb. I should have expected the look the valet gave me, hesitation. A flicker of barely concealed judgment, followed by the polite indifference that people like him reserved for guests who clearly didn't belong. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment I stepped inside and saw the reality of what Vivian had planned for me. I scanned the massive ballroom, my heart sinking as I spotted my family, our family, already seated at the grand head table alongside Lucas's high-profile guests. My name was nowhere in sight. Miss Evans? A waiter approached, a clipboard in hand. You'll be seated in the adjoining room. For a moment, I just stared at him, pulse thundering in my ears. The adjoining room. The same one where the staff would be taking their breaks, eating on metal folding chairs while the guests laughed over their $100 plates of filet mignon. I'm sorry, what? My voice came out even. But the waiter shifted uncomfortably, as if he, too, realized how humiliating this was. The bride's request, he said quietly, nodding toward Vivian, who stood across the room, smiling for the photographers, perfectly unaware, or perfectly uncaring, of the weight of what she had just done to me. I swallowed against the lump in my throat and took the long walk toward the side door. Each step felt like a nail hammering into a coffin, burying whatever remnants of sisterhood I had foolishly believed still existed between us. But as I stepped into that fluorescent-lit back room, something inside me shifted. If Vivian wanted me to disappear tonight, she was going to be sorely disappointed. Because I had no intention of fading into the background. I sat in that starkly lit room, surrounded by catering staff taking their brief moments of respite, the distant sounds of laughter and clinking champagne glasses echoing from the grand ballroom. I could feel the sting of humiliation, the deep ache of betrayal, but I refused to let it consume me. Not this time. Vivian thought she had won. She thought she could push me aside, hide me away like an inconvenient stain on her perfect wedding day. But what she didn't realize, what she never had the patience to understand, was that I had spent my whole life overcoming far worse than this. I took a deep breath, rolling my shoulders back, silently steadying myself. If she thought this was enough to break me, she was sorely mistaken. The door opened, and I looked up as Daniel Carter walked in, his presence commanding without effort. Lucas's business partner. His sharp eyes scanned the room until they landed on me, his brows knitting together in confusion. He was the kind of man who had seen enough of the world to recognize when something wasn't right. "What are you doing back here?" he asked, pulling out a chair beside me. I let out a quiet laugh, swirling the untouched champagne in my glass. "Oh, you know," I said with mock lightness. "Just enjoying the exclusive VIP section of the wedding. Apparently, my presence in the ballroom was inconvenient." His jaw tightened. "Vivian did this, didn't she?" I shrugged, refusing to let the bitterness seep into my voice. "She made her choice." Daniel studied me for a long moment, something unreadable flashing behind his gaze. Then, with an unexpected smile, he raised his glass. "Well, I happen to think you're the most interesting person at this wedding." I clinked my glass against his, holding his gaze. This moment could have broken me. It could have sent me spiraling into resentment and shame. But instead, it did something else. It reminded me exactly who I was. Vivian may have tried to silence me, but she had just made one grave mistake. She underestimated me. The moment I stepped out of that fluorescent-lit side room, I knew something had shifted. The weight of humiliation, the sting of my sister's cruelty, it was still there. But it no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it was sharpening into something else. Something far more useful. Daniel walked beside me, effortlessly drawing attention. But it wasn't his presence that made heads turn, it was mine. Maybe it was the way I carried myself now. Shoulders squared, chin lifted. Or maybe it was the fact that I no longer cared what this elite crowd thought of me. As we entered the grand ballroom again, I caught sight of Vivian across the room. She was dazzling as always, her custom gown shimmering under the chandeliers, her signature practiced smile in place for the cameras. But I saw it now for what it really was, a mask. Thin and fragile, just waiting to crack. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time that night, I saw something I had never seen in her before. Unease. "Donna," Daniel said quietly beside me, his voice laced with something between amusement and admiration. "I think you just became the most interesting thing at this wedding." I smiled, genuinely this time. "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing." A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne, and I plucked a glass without breaking eye contact with Vivian. The corners of her mouth twitched, the edges of her carefully curated world threatening to unravel. This was a turning point. Not just for this night, but for everything. Vivian had spent years ensuring I was always in the background. Always less than. Always just close enough to be a footnote in her success but never enough to have my own story. That ended now. I took a slow sip of my drink, savoring the crispness, then turned back to Daniel. Tell me, Daniel, I said, voice effortlessly smooth, how do you feel about making history tonight? He chuckled. Oh, Donna, he said, his smile widening, I thought you'd never ask. And just like that, the game changed. I always thought revenge would feel like fire, hot, all-consuming, burning through everything in its path. But standing in the center of that ballroom, watching the exact moment Vivian realized she had lost, I learned something new. True vindication feels like ice. Cold, slow, unstoppable. Daniel's voice rang out over the crowd, clear and commanding, as he made the announcement that sent ripples through the room. My name, my work, my cause. Drake Enterprises is thrilled to announce that our flagship education initiative will be led by none other than Donna Evans, a visionary educator whose dedication to special needs children has reshaped the way we think about inclusive education. Applause erupted, glasses clinked, and in the middle of it all, Vivian stood frozen. She couldn't stop this. She couldn't undo it. No cutting remarks, no backstage deals, no well-placed whispers to powerful men could erase the fact that for once, I was the one they were looking at. I let the moment stretch. Let it breathe. Let it simmer in the air around us. Then, slowly, I turned toward my sister. Her fists were clenched at her sides. Her lips pressed so tightly together that they were bloodless. You look pale, Vivian, I murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. Are you feeling unwell? She exhaled sharply through her nose. You planned this. I tilted my head. No, you planned this. You planned to humiliate me. To diminish me, again. You invited me here to be a prop in your perfect world. But now, you're the footnote in mine. Daniel stepped closer, speaking low. Vivian, if you'd like to make a public statement in support of your sister, now would be a good time. Her eyes snapped to his, panic flickering beneath the fury. She knew what was at stake. The cameras, the whispers, her image. So, with a smile that looked like it might shatter her perfectly bleached teeth, she turned back to me and forced out the words she never wanted to say. Congratulations, Donna. I sipped my champagne, savoring the taste of victory. The night should have been hers, Vivian's moment to shine, to bask in the admiration of her carefully curated world. But as the evening stretched on, I watched as the cracks in her perfect facade began to splinter. Her friends, the ones who had once whispered behind my back and laughed at my boring little life, were now surrounding Daniel, peppering him with questions about the initiative. I saw it in their eyes, the shift, the intrigue, the interest in me. Vivian noticed too. Her grip on her champagne glass tightened, the polished veneer of her control slipping ever so slightly as she tried to command their attention back. But the tide was changing, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the center of it. I sat back, letting it all unfold, letting her feel it, the slow, dawning realization that she had miscalculated. Donna, a voice purred beside me. I turned to find Victoria Langley, one of the city's most well-connected philanthropists, smiling as she took a seat. You must tell me more about your work. I've heard wonderful things, and I'd love to discuss how we can support your efforts. Before I could respond, Vivian cut in. Oh, Victoria, darling, she said with a strained laugh, placing a hand on Victoria's shoulder as though the conversation had been meant for her. It's just a little project Donna's been working on, nothing too. Actually, I interrupted, turning my attention fully to Victoria. It's something big, and growing, and now, with Daniel's backing, it's about to change the way we approach education for special needs children on a national scale. Victoria's face lit up. That's incredible. You must come to my next gala. We'll introduce you to our board. You'll have more donors lined up than you'll know what to do with. Vivian's nails dug into her palm. I could see it, the slow-burning rage beneath the thinly veiled smile. The way she held herself rigid, barely able to contain the storm brewing inside her. She had spent years erasing me, diminishing me. But tonight, I was the one they saw, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. For years, I had let Vivian define me. I had let her world dictate what was worthy, what was impressive, what had value, and for years, I had believed her. I had shrunk myself to fit into the shadow she cast, thinking that if I played along, if I didn't push too hard, maybe one day she would see me as more than just an inconvenient reminder of the past she had outgrown. But tonight, something inside me shifted. As I stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the city's most powerful and influential figures, I realized I didn't need her validation. I never had. These people weren't drawn to me because of Vivian's name or her connections. They weren't here out of pity or obligation. They were here because of me, because I had built something real. Something that mattered. When Victoria Langley invited me to her next gala, I didn't hesitate. I accepted. When a renowned education board director handed me his card, offering to set up a meeting with top donors, I took it without second-guessing myself. The hesitation, the self-doubt that had once held me back was gone. Across the room, I saw Vivian watching me, her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands clenched tightly around the stem of her champagne glass. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. And that's when it hit me. I didn't just win tonight, I had freed myself. I wasn't just the overlooked little sister anymore. I wasn't the girl they seated in the corner, the afterthought. I was a leader, a force, a woman who stood on her own. Vivian may have spent her life crafting the perfect image, but I had built something real. And unlike her world, built on wealth, deception, and empty status, mine was unshakable. I stepped away from the circle of well-wishers and made my way toward the exit. I didn't need to stay. I had bigger things ahead. I was done standing in her shadow. I was done waiting. It was my time now. The morning after the gala, I woke up with a strange feeling, clarity. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weighed down by the expectations of my family, the constant battle to prove my worth to people who had never truly valued me. Instead, I felt something else entirely, freedom. As I sipped my coffee, scrolling through the endless messages flooding my inbox, I realized that last night had changed everything. Investors, board members, and prominent figures from the education sector were reaching out, eager to discuss opportunities, funding, and expansion for my program. I had spent years knocking on closed doors, begging for the resources to give these children the education they deserved. And now? Now, the doors were opening for me. I wasn't naive. I knew many of these people had only taken an interest because of the spectacle at the gala. They saw me as the underdog who had defied the odds, the woman who had turned her sister's moment of power into her own. But that didn't matter, because once they saw the work I was doing, once they truly understood what my program could achieve, it wouldn't just be about the story. It would be about the impact. I grabbed my notebook, flipping through the pages filled with scribbled ideas, late-night plans, and abandoned dreams, dreams I now had the power to resurrect. But just as I was about to dive into my work, my phone buzzed. Vivian. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then, finally, I answered. Donna, she started, her voice unusually measured. We need to talk. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. She needed to talk, not to scold me, not to belittle me, not to remind me of my place. No, this time, she needed something from me. Do we? I asked, twirling my pen between my fingers. A pause, a hesitation, the first crack in her armor. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing Vivian. She was coming to me. I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early, not because I was eager to see Vivian, but because I wanted to watch her walk in, I wanted to see what desperation looked like on the face of the sister who had spent years treating me as an afterthought. When she finally arrived, I barely recognized her. Vivian had always carried herself like she was untouchable, exuding confidence, wealth, and status. But today, she looked small. Her hair wasn't styled to perfection. Her designer bag wasn't perched on her wrist like a trophy. And the gleam of superiority was missing from her eyes. "Donna," she greeted, forcing a tight-lipped smile as she sat across from me. "Vivian," I said, mirroring her smile but without the effort to make it seem polite. I leaned back, waiting. She was the one who had asked for this meeting. She was the one who needed something. She sighed, drumming her manicured nails against the table. "Look, I'll just say it. Things are difficult right now." Difficult. What an interesting choice of words. "Lucas is furious," she continued. "The investors are nervous. My reputation." She stopped, closing her eyes briefly before exhaling sharply. "I need your help." I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "My help?" "That's funny," I mused, "because when I needed help, you had no problem seating me in a back room with the staff. When I needed support, you pretended I didn't exist. But now that your world is crumbling, suddenly, I'm worth talking to?" She flinched but said nothing. She knew I was right. "You stole everything from me," I continued, my voice calm but laced with steel. "Opportunities, respect, even my dignity at your wedding. And now, you want me to fix the mess you created?" Vivian's silence was suffocating. I leaned forward, smiling just enough for her to feel the weight of her defeat. "I think you should figure this one out on your own." And with that, I stood up, dropping a few bills on the table, not for my coffee, but for hers. A parting gift. For the first time ever, Vivian was the one left behind. The days following my final conversation with Vivian were strangely quiet. No more late-night calls filled with forced apologies. No more frantic messages from our parents, begging me to be the bigger person and bail her out. No more of the weight I had carried for years, trying to be seen by a family that had never truly valued me. For the first time in my life, I was free. I walked into my office that morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer Donna, the shadow of my sister's success. I was Donna Evans, the woman who had built something real, something lasting. My work in education was thriving. And with the backing of Drake Enterprises, we had secured funding to expand our special education initiative across the state. As I stood by my office window, looking out at the city skyline, my assistant knocked softly. "Miss Evans, there's someone here to see you." I turned, expecting yet another investor meeting. But when I stepped into the reception area, it wasn't a business partner waiting for me, it was my mother. She stood there, twisting her pearls between her fingers, her eyes darting nervously around the room. For years, she had been Vivian's strongest defender, dismissing my accomplishments while celebrating every one of my sister's mediocre successes. Yet now, here she was, standing in my office, needing something from me. I just wanted to see you," she said hesitantly. "It's been weeks. Your father and we miss you." I studied her for a moment, trying to decide if I felt anything at all. Did I miss them? Did I still crave their approval? Finally, I nodded toward the chair across from my desk. "Then sit." And as she lowered herself into the seat, for the first time, I was the one in control. As I stood on the stage, the warm glow of the spotlight washing over me, I looked out at the audience, educators, students, families, and community leaders who had gathered to celebrate the opening of the Donna Evans Center for Inclusive Education. My name, once a mere footnote in my own family, now stood proudly on the plaque outside the doors of a place that would change lives for generations to come. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, but not from nerves. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to take up space. I wasn't waiting for permission to be seen. I had built this, without my family's approval. Without their validation. Without their help. Daniel stood in the front row, giving me a small nod of encouragement. The same man who had been a witness to my lowest moment at my sister's wedding was now standing beside me in my greatest triumph. He believed in me before I believed in myself. And now, here I was. Proof that strength isn't inherited, it's forged. As I spoke, I saw parents wipe tears from their eyes. Teachers nod in understanding. Children whispering excitedly about what this school meant for them. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every child who had been told they weren't worth investing in. I ended my speech with words I had waited my whole life to say. No one gets to decide your worth but you. The applause was thunderous, but what mattered most was the feeling deep inside me. I had won. Not just over my past. Not just over my sister. But over the doubts that had once chained me. This was my legacy, and it was only the beginning.